Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive into fascinating ideas from some really cool texts. This time, we're going to be looking at scientific occultism from a 1905 work by David Hatch, which is kind of a mouthful, I know.
Well, even that title alone might sound a little contradictory to some people, mixing science and the occult.
Oh, right. Like, do we need a lab coat or a wizard's hat for this one?
Well, in a way, it's kind of both.
Yeah, I guess so.
Hatch was really trying to build a hypothetical basis of life, where those two seemingly opposite things, science and this deeper, more philosophical way of looking at existence, could coexist.
And that really speaks to the intellectual atmosphere of the early 1900s, right?
Hmm.
Everyone was trying to figure out the fundamental laws of the universe.
Exactly. It was like this big push to understand everything, life included, through this one big principle.
Yeah. And Hatch points out that this wasn't something new, People have been searching for that unifying principle for like forever.
Absolutely. Thinkers across history have been obsessed with this idea.
So what makes Hatch different?
Well, he wasn't trying to throw science out the window. He was really trying to create a hypothesis that actually worked with what scientists already knew at the time.
Ah, so it's more like expanding on science rather than replacing it.
Precisely. He wanted to use science to create a bigger, more complete picture of the world. And a really important part of his work, and something I really want you to think about, is this idea of immortal units of force.
Okay, that sounds pretty intense. What are those exactly?
You can think of them um, like the fundamental building blocks of everything, of all life. Hatch's idea is that every single thing we experience as being alive comes from these units and how they interact with each other.
And as you know, any good hypothesis should explain what we already see and maybe even predict some things we haven't discovered yet, right?
Exactly. So to really get into Hatch's ideas, he starts by being really, really specific about what he means by certain words. Words like law, laws, and life. These are the foundation of his whole argument.
All right. Let's start with law, the one with the capital L. How did he define that?
So when Hatch talks about law, he's not talking about rules that people made up.
Right.
For him, it's way more fundamental than that. He says it's the inevitable, the constant, the mathematics of combination or environment, the necessity for specialization, a thing unthinkable save that it is.
Wow.
In other words, it's just IS. It's this unchanging principle that exists no matter what. It's like the fabric of reality itself.
So it's like this ultimate truth that everything else comes from.
Exactly. Then you have the laws with a lowercase l.
Oh, okay. So there's a difference.
There is. For Hatch, these are like tendencies or specializations of a law, and they're kind of the opposite of the law itself.
So if the law is this big, unchanging thing, what are these lowercase laws like?
Imagine them as like mathematical principles that help create the environments where life can exist and do its thing.
So like specific rules for how things work within this big picture law.
Exactly. And science has found a ton of these specific laws that explain how different things work. But, and this is important, we still haven't found one big law that explains everything about life.
Okay, so that's law and laws. What about life itself? How did Hatch define that?
Well, for Hatch, life is variety, motion, manifestation, specialization in its various forms, resulting in combinations or environment. It's the end, purpose, and result of the laws, and really important, the experience of the will.
So life is all about change, experience, and having the will to act.
You got it. It comes from those fundamental tendencies we talked about, and it's tied to the idea of being able to make choices.
Okay, I think I'm following so far. We've got the big law, the more specific laws, and life as this experience filled with variety and choice. Now let's get back to those immortal units of force. Can you explain a bit more about them?
This is where things get really interesting. So Hatch says that these units of force exist at the deepest level of reality.
Deeper than even the law.
Well, they're kind of inseparable, you see. Each unit can create a certain amount of energy, but it's limited and unique to that unit. No two are exactly alike.
Oh, so kind of like a fingerprint. Each one is different.
Yeah, like that. And all life, everything you see, feel, experience, comes from these units interacting with each other constantly, forever. They can be in a state of potential energy just waiting to happen, or kinetic energy, where things are actually in motion. But they're always, always in this dance of interaction.
So it's like a never-ending cosmic dance party of these tiny units.
That's a great way to put it. And even though each unit has a limited amount of energy, the possibilities for variety in their motion and how they express themselves are practically endless. That's what makes life so diverse and complex.
And I guess trying to prove that these units exist is pretty tricky. I mean, if they're the basis of everything, how can we even observe them separately?
Yeah, Hatch knew that. It's like trying to, I don't know, see your own eyes without a mirror.
That's a good analogy.
Right.
So how did he justify his theory then?
Well, he said that the strength of his idea is that it explains what we see around us.
Yeah.
If you can account for all the different forms of life and how they work, then it's a pretty good hypothesis, at least until something better comes along, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. And there's another interesting thing about these units. He said they're like original centers of force with all the qualities of the entire universe, but they're still individual parts.
Right. It's almost paradoxical.
Yeah, how can something be both a part and the whole at the same time?
Well, it goes back to this idea that you can't have a whole without its parts. You need both for the other to exist.
So these units are essential for the universe to be unified, but they also need their individuality.
Exactly. And Hatch takes it even further. He says you can't have unity with just one thing. You need at least two. And from there, logically, you can infer there must be a huge, maybe infinite number of these units to create the universe we know.
So to recap, we're talking about a universe built on a fundamental law that leads to more specific laws. Those laws create the conditions for life, which is all about variety, motion, and experience. And driving this whole system are these immortal units of force, each with their own unique energy and endless possibilities for expression.
That's a great summary. It's a pretty grand, almost poetic way of looking at reality, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And as we dig deeper into scientific occultism, you'll see how Hatch uses this idea to explain everything from consciousness to ethics, crime, and even the relationship between mind and matter.
Okay, so we're just getting started with Hatch and his ideas. We've laid the groundwork, and next time we'll really unpack how he applies this framework to some really big questions. So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's just go back to the main theme of scientific occultism that we've talked about today.
Sure.
At its heart, you've got these immortal units of force that constantly interact with each other.
Yeah. And that interplay, along with Hatch's definitions of law, laws, and life, is what he sees as the source of all the complexity and diversity we see in life.
And something that really stood out to me was this idea of duality, this kind of push and pull that's woven throughout Hatch's whole system. Like he's emphasizing this polarized unity, where opposing forces are actually essential for things to exist.
That's a great point. He talks about how this opposition, this polarity, is at the core of, well, almost everything, like mind and matter, or action and reaction.
Yeah, it's like you need both sides for either one to make sense.
Exactly. And he argues that this constant dance between opposites is what drives the rhythm of the universe and how everything manifests. It's what makes things happen.
And it's not just about physics and metaphysics, right? Hatch even applies this to ethics.
Right, he does. He talks about the law of relationship, where he says being moral means understanding how interconnected we all are.
So basically, being good means acknowledging that we're all part of this bigger web of relationships.
That's right. And crime, for him, happens when people ignore or break these fundamental connections between those units of force.
So it's like when you harm someone else, you're disrupting the harmony of the whole system.
That's the idea. And because these units are essentially immortal, Hatch also talks about the idea of individual and universal immortality.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about the units themselves lasting forever, but our consciousness too?
In a way, yeah. He suggests that because the units are eternal and we experience things through memory, both our individual consciousness and the universe itself have a kind of continuity. They keep going in some form.
That's a pretty profound thought.
It is. And to top it all off, Hatch really stresses the importance of will.
Right. We talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah. He sees will as this free, independent power that each unit of force has.
So we're not just puppets of some bigger force. We actually get to make choices that affect things.
That's exactly what he's saying. It means we're not just following the law blindly. We have the power to direct our energy and make decisions. We're active participants in how our lives and the universe unfold.
So he's giving us a lot to think about, isn't he? This 1905 hypothesis, this attempt to blend science and a deeper understanding of life through these fundamental units. It's really interesting to consider how it compares to how we think about things today, like consciousness, energy, and even the nature of reality itself.
I think that's the real takeaway here.
Yeah.
How does Hatch's framework, which is over a century old, make you think about the invisible forces at play in the universe? And how does it make you think about your place in all of that?
Great questions, and ones we'll be diving deeper into in the next part of this deep dive.